When was the last time you made a decision that was truly yours? Not a response to what others expect, not a move to avoid disappointment, not a choice filtered through the accumulated shoulds of parents and culture and the invisible committee that's been running your life since you were old enough to learn what approval costs. Most men don't realize they're living someone else's script until they're decades in, standing in a life that looks successful from the outside, but feels hollow from the inside. And by then the question isn't just, how did I get here? But who the hell am I underneath all this performance? You're here because something in you recognizes the gap between the life you're living and the life that wants to be lived through you. And that recognition, uncomfortable as it is the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are instead of who you were conditioned to be. Jung understood that most people live their entire lives in what he called the persona, the social mask we construct to navigate the world, to earn love and approval and belonging. And the tragedy is that we forget it's a mask. We identify so completely with the acceptable version of ourselves that we lose contact with the self, the deeper organizing principle buried beneath the layers of adaptation and performance. What we're doing today is naming 5 unmistakable signs that you're living from persona instead of self, from conditioning instead of authenticity. And once you can see these patterns clearly, you can begin the work of claiming your actual life. Sign 1. Success without satisfaction. You've achieved what you set out to achieve. The degree, the promotion, the house, the relationship, the markers that everyone said would mean you'd made it. And yet there's this persistent emptiness, this sense that you're waiting for your real life to start, even though by external metrics you're already living it. You check the boxes, and each one brings a brief hit of relief or validation, but underneath there's a gnawing question. Is this it? Is this what I worked so hard for? And the answer your body gives, even when your mind tries to rationalize it away, is no, this isn't it. Because this life was designed by someone else's blueprint, built to satisfy someone else's definition of success, and no amount of external achievement can fill the hole left by abandoning your own path. This is what Jung meant when he talked about the inflation of the persona. You can build a magnificent structure, a life that impresses everyone, including yourself, but if it's not rooted in your actual self, if it's not connected to what genuinely wants to be lived through you, then it's just an elaborate performance, and you're the one trapped inside it. The man who climbs the corporate ladder because his father valued status. The man who stays in the stable career because his mother feared risk. The man who pursues wealth because culture equates it with worth. These men might succeed spectacularly by conventional standards, but the success tastes like ash because it's not theirs. It's an inheritance of someone else's dreams and fears. The diagnostic here is the gap between what looks good and what feels true, between external validation and internal alignment. And if you're honest, you can feel the difference in your body. When you're living your actual life, even the difficult parts have a quality of rightness, of, yes, this is hard, but it's my hard. This is what I'm here for. When you're living someone else's life, even the successes feel borrowed, hollow, and the dissatisfaction isn't ingratitude. It's yourself trying to get your attention, trying to tell you that the life you're living isn't the one you came here to live. Sign 2. Chronic comparison and competition. You can't stop measuring yourself against other men, their achievements, their relationships, their bodies, their apparent ease and confidence, and every comparison leaves you feeling either inflated if you come out ahead or deflated if you come up short. But never simply present with your own life, your own path, your own unfolding. You're in a meeting, and instead of listening to what's being said, You're tracking who's more respected, who got more attention, who's winning the invisible game of status. You see another man's success and it triggers something sharp in you, envy or resentment or a desperate need to prove you're just as good. And you can't just let him have his win because his success feels like evidence of your inadequacy. This compulsive comparison is the persona's desperate attempt to establish worth through external metrics, through positioning yourself in the hierarchy, through winning the approval game. And it's exhausting because the game has no end point, no moment when you finally won enough to relax. Jung was clear about this. When you're living from persona rather than self, you're always oriented outward, always referencing others to know if you're okay. And this makes you fundamentally unstable because your sense of worth is hostage to forces outside your control. The man living his own life isn't indifferent to others, but he's rooted in his own ground, his own values, his own sense of what matters. And so he can witness another man's success without feeling diminished by it, can acknowledge another man's gifts without needing to compete because his worth isn't on the table. The shadow side of chronic comparison is that it prevents you from ever actually arriving in your own life. You're always somewhere else, always in the imagined life of the man you're comparing yourself to, always focused on the gap between where you are and where you think you should be. You miss the moment your child looks at you with complete trust because you're distracted by thoughts of the father you think you should be. You miss the satisfaction of work well done because you're already focused on the next achievement that will finally prove your worth. And underneath all of it is the terror that if you stop comparing, if you simply show up as who you actually are, you'll be revealed as insufficient. And so the comparison continues and your actual life remains unlived. Sign 3. You can't say no. You say yes when you mean no, agree when you want to decline, accommodate when you need to set a boundary, and you do this so automatically, so reflexively, that you often don't even notice the internal no before you've already said yes out loud. Your time isn't yours. It's colonized by other people's needs and requests and expectations, and you feel resentful but also trapped because saying no feels impossible, dangerous, like it will lead to rejection or conflict or the withdrawal of love. You're overcommitted and exhausted, and the schedule you're maintaining isn't serving your priorities. It's serving everyone else's access to you, and yet you keep saying yes, keep taking on more, keep accommodating, because somewhere deep in your conditioning you learn that your worth is tied to your usefulness, that love is earned through service, that your own needs are less important than keeping others happy. This inability to say no is a direct consequence of living someone else's life, of organizing your behavior around maintaining the persona that earns approval rather than honoring the self that knows what's actually true for you. Jung would say you're identified with the persona to such a degree that you've lost contact with your own will, your own desire, your own legitimate needs, and so you're essentially volunteered by default for anything anyone asks because there's no inner authority, no grounded sense of self that can assess the request and respond from truth rather than fear. The boy learned early that saying no meant losing love, meant being selfish or difficult, and so he exiled his own capacity for refusal, for healthy selfishness, for the masculine prerogative to establish boundaries and protect his own territory, and now the adult is living with the consequences. A life that's full of obligations, but empty of genuine desire, busy but not purposeful, productive but not fulfilling. The cost of chronic accommodation shows up everywhere. in relationships where you're needed but not desired, where your partner experiences you as reliable but not passionate, present but not alive, in work where you're the person everyone goes to because you never say no, and so you're drowning in other people's priorities while your own projects languish, in your body, which keeps the score of all that suppressed refusal in the form of tension, fatigue, the physical manifestation of a life being lived against your actual grain. And the paradox Jung understood is that your inability to say no also compromises your yes. When you can't refuse, when every agreement is compulsory rather than chosen, then your yes means nothing. It has no weight, no integrity, because it's not a real choice. The man who can say no clearly and cleanly is the man whose yes actually means something, whose presence is a gift rather than an obligation, whose relationships are based on genuine desire rather than fear of abandonment. Sign 4, the life you show versus the life you live. There's a version of your life that exists on social media, in conversations with acquaintances, in the stories you tell at gatherings, a curated, edited, optimized version where everything looks purposeful and together and moving in the right direction. And then there's the actual life you're living when no one's watching, when you're alone with yourself, when the performance drops and you're confronted with the gap between image and reality. Maybe the marriage looks solid from the outside, but you haven't had a real conversation with your wife in months. Or the career looks impressive, but you're profoundly bored and counting down to retirement. Or the fitness posts suggest discipline and vitality, but you're medicating with alcohol most nights. The gap between what you show and what you live isn't occasional or minor. It's the organizing principle of your existence, and maintaining that gap requires constant energy, constant performance, constant vigilance about what gets revealed and what stays hidden. This split between public self and private reality is what Jung called the inflation and falsification of the persona. You've invested so much in the image, in the acceptable version of yourself, that the image has become more real than the reality, more important than the truth, and now you're trapped serving the image instead of living the life. The persona was meant to be a flexible tool, a way to navigate social reality while remaining rooted in the authentic self. But when you lose contact with the self, when the persona becomes your identity instead of your strategy, you end up living in a house of mirrors where every reflection is a version of the acceptable you, but none of them are actually real. And the exhaustion of maintaining this performance is immense. You're essentially living two lives, the one you show and the one you hide, and the energy required to keep them separate is energy that could be going toward actually living, actually building something real, actually becoming who you are, instead of maintaining who you're pretending to be. The deeper danger here is that over time you start to lose track of what's true. You've been performing for so long, telling the curated version of your story for so many years, that you begin to believe it yourself, or at least you lose confidence in your ability to distinguish between the performance and the reality. Jung called this the identification with persona, and it's one of the most dangerous forms of self-alienation because you're cut off from your own truth, operating on autopilot, living a script that was written by the internalized voices of parents and culture, but presented as if it's your own choice. And the self, the authentic core, is so buried under layers of performance that you've forgotten it exists. Sign 5, persistent anxiety without clear cause. You're anxious most of the time, not panic, not crisis, just this low-grade constant hum of tension and vigilance and unease that follows you through your days and keeps you half awake at night. You can't point to any specific threat or problem that would justify the level of anxiety you feel. Objectively, your life is fine, maybe even good, and yet your nervous system is in a state of constant alert, as if you're waiting for something terrible to happen, as if you're always just one mistake away from catastrophe. You've tried to manage it. Exercise, meditation, therapy, medication, and maybe those things help at the margins. But the anxiety persists because you're treating it as a symptom to be eliminated rather than a message to be understood. And the message is this: you are living out of alignment with your actual self, and your body knows it. And the anxiety is the alarm system telling you that something is fundamentally wrong, even if you can't consciously name what it is. When you're living someone else's life, when you're organized around maintaining the persona and earning approval and avoiding rejection rather than honoring the truth of the self, you're in a constant state of low-level threat because you're always at risk of being exposed, always one slip away from revealing the parts of yourself that you've learned are unacceptable, always performing and monitoring and managing. And the performance requires vigilance because if you let your guard down, if you stop controlling the presentation, the real you might leak out. And then what? The anxiety isn't irrational. It's the entirely rational response to living a life where your survival strategy depends on hiding who you actually are, where your worth is contingent on successful performance, where any authentic expression feels dangerous because it might threaten the carefully constructed image that's keeping you connected to love and approval and belonging. Jung understood anxiety as the psyche's signal that something is out of order, that the conscious orientation is in conflict with deeper truths. And in this case, the deeper truth is that you're living a life that doesn't belong to you, pursuing goals that aren't yours, maintaining relationships based on who you're pretending to be rather than who you are, and the self is in rebellion. The anxiety is the voice of the unlived life demanding to be heard, the voice of the parts you exiled demanding to come home, the voice of your actual desire and truth that you've suppressed in service of being acceptable. And no amount of anxiety management will resolve it because the anxiety isn't the problem. The inauthenticity is the problem, and the anxiety is just the symptom, the alarm telling you the house is on fire. The return to self. Living someone else's life isn't about being weak or unconscious. It's about being human, about being born into a family and culture with specific expectations and learning to adapt, because adaptation is survival for a child who's utterly dependent on the adults around him. You didn't choose to abandon your own life. You made completely rational decisions based on what you observed about how to earn love, how to stay safe, how to belong. And those decisions made sense then, even if they're killing you now. The persona isn't your enemy. It's the protective structure you built to navigate a world that couldn't hold the full truth of you. And the work isn't to destroy the persona, but to right-size it, to return it to its proper function as a flexible tool rather than a rigid identity, and to reconnect with the self that's been waiting underneath all this time. What living your own life actually means is becoming conscious of the difference between conditioning and choice, between automatic adaptation and authentic expression, between the life you inherited and the life that wants to be lived through you. It means asking the dangerous questions. What do I actually want, not what should I want? What brings me alive, not what brings approval? What would I do if I wasn't afraid of disappointing anyone? And it means being willing to tolerate the discomfort of discovering that the answers might require you to change course, to disappoint people, to let go of the image you've been maintaining, to risk rejection in service of truth. The man who's done this work has a quality that's unmistakable. There's a groundedness, a presence, a sense that he's inhabiting his own life rather than performing someone else's. He still has a persona, still navigates social reality appropriately, but he can take it off, can be alone with himself without performance, can show up in relationship without constantly managing perception. His successes are his own, and so they satisfy. His failures are his own, and so they teach. He can be with other men's achievements without diminishing himself, can say no clearly without guilt, can say yes powerfully because it's chosen. The gap between public and private narrows because he's no longer hiding fundamental truths, and the energy that was going into maintaining the performance is now available for building, creating, loving, being. The anxiety doesn't disappear entirely, but it's no longer chronic, no longer the background hum of a life lived out of alignment. You've been performing someone else's life so long, you almost believe it's yours. Almost convince yourself that the dissatisfaction is just how life is, that everyone feels this hollow. But the dissatisfaction isn't a character flaw. It's a message from the unlived life, from the self that knows you came here for something specific, and you're spending your days on someone else's agenda. The anxiety isn't a disorder. It's the alarm telling you that your conscious choices are in conflict with your deeper truth. The comparison, the inability to say no, the gap between image and reality, these aren't weaknesses. They're symptoms of a life being lived from the outside in instead of the inside out. You don't have forever to make this turn. Somewhere between youth and death, there comes a moment when the question changes from how do I succeed to what am I actually here for? And if you ignore that question, you wake up one day as an old man who achieved everything except the life you actually wanted to live. The work isn't comfortable, isn't safe, isn't guaranteed, but it's yours, and that makes all the difference. Be the man who lives his own life, who pays the cost of authenticity, who's willing to disappoint people in service of truth. Not perfectly, not all at once, but reliably, one choice at a time, one honest moment at a time, one step closer to the life that's been waiting for you to claim it. Begin.